evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Today we are broadcasting the Biff and Buff program from the Art Institute in Chicago. The reason we are at the Institute is because the Art Institute in Chicago has one of the largest collections of Impressionist art in the country. And our program today is featuring Impressionist art. My brother Buff is in the gallery selecting paintings that we're going to use in today's program. This is Casey Phillips, executive producer of the Biff and Buff program. Casey, you're usually behind the scenes, selecting guests and doing things to get the program on the air. How does it feel to be in front of the camera this time?
It's a change, all right, and I have many questions. Yeah, the Art Institute itself is a magnificent building on a beautiful location.
Well, we hope we can answer some of your questions. The Impressionist art that we look at today in the 20th century, 21st century now, that is some of the greatest art in the world, was not accepted at first. The painters who did this work were considered to be people who just didn't finish a job. It looked like they had started and then maybe given up on it and didn't continue anyway. But the reason for that was because they painted outdoors and they wanted to get the moment.
They actually brought their easels and paints and worked outside?
Because they wanted to get that particular moment. An hour from now, the shadows are different, the sun has moved, and it's not quite the same. So they painted in quick, short strokes and very vivid colors. Black or gray was absolutely not an option with them. They did not use these colors. And what they did, for the first time in the history of painting, they were able to capture sunlight. That is one of the things that made their paintings much more vivid and much more bright. The term Impressionism was originally used by a journalist named Louis L'Amour, who wrote in a popular magazine very critical about the type of work that was being done by these artists that we now think of as some of the famous and most great artists in the world. In 1874, the Paris Academy, which was the great exhibition hall they used every year, it was done at the Salon. The Salon was part of the Louvre, and that's where the exhibit was held. In the year 1874, they had over 5,000 paintings submitted to be in the exhibit.
5,000 paintings for one exhibition?
Well, they didn't take very many of them, and they took none of the Impressionist paintings. They didn't do any of them. So what they did themselves, they decided to have their own exhibition. And they held it in the photography studio of Nader. Nader was a famous photographer and also a balloonist. But they held the exhibition there. And it was known as the Exhibition of the Refused. At that time, Louis III was the Emperor of France. And he visited the Exhibition of the Refused. In fact, he even bought a painting there. The founders of Impressionist art were Claude Monet, Alfred Sisley, Frederic Bizet, and Auguste Renoir. They were all students at one time in classes studying painting, and they were all friends. And they all worked together over the years. They were the people who started the first Impressionist art, the first thing called the art of the refused. Claude Monet was the son of a Parisian shopkeeper who moved later to Le Havre when the boy was about 5 years old. He went to school there, and he became very well known for his charcoal drawings and also his caricatures. In fact, he made enough money doing caricatures to pay his way through art school eventually. His famous painting, Sunrise, is one of the most well-known Impressionist paintings today. In fact, it was the subject that caused Lemoy to write the critical article that was printed in the Parisian papers.
I think sunrise is beautiful.
At first, Monet was not attracted to Impressionist paintings whatsoever. But a man by the name of Baudin, who painted scenes along the beach in Le Havre, he became well acquainted with him and saw his paintings and changed his mind and became an Impressionist painter himself. He served briefly in the military in Algeria, after which he came home and suffered typhoid fever. After he recovered from typhoid fever, he started art school. It was in art school that he met Renoir, Sisley, and Frederic Bazel. The four became fast friends, and their friendship culminated in the exhibition of the Refuse. Frederic Bazel was the son of a wealthy wine merchant in Paris. His circumstances were quite different than the other artists. He had money to go to school, but his career was cut short by service in the war between France and Germany, the Franco-Prussian War, where he died. So his paintings are rather limited as compared to some of the other artists. As a student in art school, he befriended Renoir, Sisley, and Monet. And they painted outdoors. They were one of the first people to paint outdoors and to get the brilliant sunlight down on canvas.
They actually brought their easels and paints and worked outside?
They painted outdoors at Fontainebleau and Normandy. Much of his work retained a high finish and dark pastel. For example, his rendering of Negro woman with peonies. Most of his paintings were portraits of people. He did not do much landscape painting. His most famous painting known today is The Family Reunion. Alfred Sisley was the son of an English merchant living in Paris, and he remained a British citizen all of his life. He turned, after 4 years in London studying to be a businessman, he turned to art, and that became his career. And his landscape paintings today are recognized as some of the foremost Impressionist art in the world. He drew drawings mostly of things that happen every day, a snow scene, a railroad station, things that people were doing, and they showed life as it was in France at that particular time. And he concentrated on the quiet and slightly moving aspects of life in that part of the country. They showed how life was in France at that particular time. Renoir had a little bit more professional experience than his contemporaries. His father, who was a tailor, had moved to Paris. Young Renoir's artistic gift was initially put to use in a China pottery, where he worked as an apprentice, spending his lunchtime drawing at the Louvre, which was nearby. When the pottery manufacturer bought a machine that did the same work, Renoir lost his job. Eventually, he saved enough money to enter the École des Beaux-Arts.
You talk about men. Weren't there women doing this type of art too?
It was at this time that Renoir met Henri Fantin-Latour. Fantin-Latour placed 2 young women, Edna and Berthe Marisot, in art school to teach them landscape painting. Berthe and Edna Marisot, as well as many other women, such as Eva Gonzalez and Mary Cassatt, were equally important as the men in the development of the Impressionist art technique. That's our show for tonight. We hope you've enjoyed your visit to the Great Chicago Art Institute, where we saw some of the world's greatest Impressionist paintings. Casey, is your chance to get away from California for a while. Get to Chicago to the magnificent Art Institute on magnificent Michigan Avenue, my hometown, Chicago, and see some of the great paintings that we saw today.
Oh, I love it here. I'm glad to be here.
And Biff, we appreciate your work in selecting these paintings today. You did a great job. We appreciate what you've done, and we saw some of the greatest paintings in the world today thanks to your picking them out. There are so many beautiful Impressionist paintings in the Chicago Art Institute, it was difficult to choose. I tried to pick what I felt was typical of the work done by each of the 4 artists we featured in tonight's program. You can see more Biff and Buff programs on Facebook and Twitter. And we'd like to hear from you. We welcome your ideas, suggestions, and comments.